Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And I decided to put this, and this show is mostly about all the frequent requests that I get for um, going into something that unfortunately has been overly dramatized by Hollywood, which is exorcisms and um, people that have personality changes. And you have one of two camps. You have either the pure scientists, like say, and we're going to go into, let's say, for mental illness, let's say this is strictly mental illness, and anybody that says that there's any type of spiritual interference, that's like, forget it, they're like off their heads. And then you get the other side, which is says that that a lot of mental illness, or all of it, is sometimes caused by an interfering spirit. And the truth is that sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes you have a what you call a foot in both camps. Okay, now let me go ahead and elaborate on that. And by the way, I'm going to base most of what I'm going to talk about right now on findings of certain doctors that have written books. And you're going to find that list below. Okay. The name of the titles of the books. And as a matter of fact, just so nobody thinks I'm just hyping it, these are all mine. Okay. That you're going to find there, like this one. You can tell I really tear that up with all my little notes. Okay. This one, by the way, is a great one. But anyway, um, most, if not all, besides my own practical experience, which is what I based my practice on, was on the findings and the teachings of these doctors, and it's described in their books. Okay, so I did list them below. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go into what most people um, consider. I'm going to go into them first of all, the initial conversations that I get, or questions that I get, as far as what is spiritual attachments and possessions and so forth. And let's start off with the basics. And by the way, if you see me every once in a while, um, refer to my notes. It's just that I'm trying to stay and make sure that I'm on track, because I could go all over the place and I want to keep it concise, because basically what I'm going to give you is the first layer of um, this information. And I mean, it can be much more complex. I don't want by any means to think that this is so simple, that it's not, but it is. And of course, what everybody always asks me is, what is a spiritual attachment? And basically what it is you have the spirit, or the soul, however you want to look at it, of a person. Not all the time it's person, but a discarnate being or entity or fragment of their personality that invades either your body or your aura. And this is really important. Later on, I want to explain how important that is. An attached being might appear behavior, mental or emotional state, or even a physical condition that normally does not respond to other forms of intervention. And by this, I mean sometimes people do go to the doctor and they just never get a conclusive either diagnosis or treatment to what's going on with them. I mean, that's only one of the ways that you might say, okay, there's something going on beyond just an organic problem. And let me explain. When a person dies, okay, normally, we've all heard of, you go into the tunnel, whichever, if that's what you believe, you go into heaven or you find the light, and you, in some cases, it's described that you meet your loved ones that guide you over. Now, however, if you have a soul that is heavy with negative emotions and a lot of undesirable habits like rage, cruelty, etc., it's going to be too negative to be attracted to the light. Okay, now, by no means am I saying it's going to be condemned. Sometimes this soul, its environment is going to change as it starts to change its negative habits. But sometimes when you have a person with these traits just after death, sometimes that moment that people describe where they're attracted to the light, they just don't see it. And it's almost like a mixture in water. The heaviest souls, okay, after death, sink to the lowest astral level, and then the rest find an appropriate level in between. Now, I'm going to describe the type of entities that, end up attaching themselves to your aura or to your body, or sometimes just influencing you. The first are called wanderers, okay? Now, these are persons who died and did not really have a clear idea of what actually happens to your consciousness right after your body dies. So in other words, they kind of like are bewildered because they don't understand that they're still aware, even though their body is dead and they can't get back in their body. So they kind of like remain in the area of the earth plane. Now they're able to see and hear other living people, but it's the other way around. They're invisible and they can't be heard by the living, which, by the way, this causes them a great deal of frustration. Now, this is at this point, by the way, I'm talking here about entities, which is really important, that are not attached to a place like the haunted house. This is when they start to wander aimlessly, and they're called wanderers. Okay, now, some remain close to where they were buried, to their body, and others become, go to a specific location, and then these are the ones that are known as ghosts. Okay, now, I want to make a very important distinction here. Not all entities or discarnates are tied to a location. And this is really, really important when it comes to this type of situation where you might have an entity who is not really aware that they're dead, and they're going to not become attached to a location. And you see a lot of these ghost shows that's exactly, they're going after that specific ghost that's at this location. And sometimes in my experience, these ghosts or spirits, unless they're very belligerent, they kind of like get lost if they think that there's a team or in some type of interventions going to come into play there. And what ends up happening is that you get these wanderers who sometimes show up because they know that there's going to be some type of attempt at spirit communication. Now, anyway, what happens with some of these wanderers, let's say they're not stuck in a place, they're not stuck in their next to their bodies in a cemetery, okay? And what they do is they find a place that is lighter or warmer than the darkness that their earthbound state puts them in. And that place sometimes turns out to be the body or the aura of a living person. Okay, now they can become sometimes attached with no connection between themselves and this living person. In other words, this could be a total stranger to them. Okay, sometimes there is, and the thing is, sometimes that attachment happens with neither they knowing that spirit becoming aware of it, or their host being aware of it. Now, there's another type of entity that are called invaders. Okay, now those are the ones that human living host used to have a relationship with when they were alive. Now, it could, of course, like always, everybody thinks, yes, a relationship of love or friendship, but also of hatred or revenge. Okay, or in other words, they come and make an attachment to this person based on that relationship or the strong emotions between them. Okay, now the types of entities that usually are invaders are the most common, of course, are deceased human beings. Okay, now believe it or not, there's something called thought forms. Now, thought forms are usually created by a combined thinking of many people, like as in a belief system, believe it or not, or by someone who deliberately, forcefully, obsessively thinks about something. And maybe some of you have heard of the tulpa, okay, which was a form created just by sheer thought. Okay, this is along those lines. And it does take on a life of its own, and it can affect a living person. Another type is animal souls. This is really rare, okay? But yes, there are cases where you will have an invasion by an animal soul, but it is very rare. Okay, then you get elemental spirits. Now, elementals have never been a live human being. They're, if you want to, non-human. Okay, they're usually rather low intelligence, and but they're normally a little bit on the negative side. Again, they've never had a physical body of their own, but they're on the relatively mild side. Okay, then you have what's called discarnates, beings of a demonic nature. Now, there's two types. There's the minor one, okay, which is they're usually captives of stronger ones. Okay, and in a releasement session, you can kind of convince them to see the light in themselves. Sometimes you can cross them over into the light, even if they're not human, by the way, which a lot of traditional exorcism approaches is to expel that spirit or whatever it is. And in spirit release therapy, you basically allow that entity to discover the light of God, of the divine, whatever you want to call it, and cross them over as well. Okay, then you have what's called major dark ones. Okay, now these are malicious, they're highly intelligent, and they resist. They're very difficult to work with in a spirit releasement therapy session. Okay, in other words, it can be done, but they don't go with the program. They fight it all the way. Now, there's also something very interesting with this, which is called nesting or piggyback. Okay, now the way it works is this way. Imagine that you have an old alcoholic who's died, and his soul continues to haunt the bars, okay, where he used to hang out at. Now, he in life had been obsessed by the soul of another drinker who had also died before, okay, and who in fact had increased that old man's addiction, and like brought about his death very quickly. Now, let's suppose that this two-in-one kind of package or situation invades another person or another customer at that bar, and they obsess him. Okay, now, just to give you an example, this person might leave the house, this third person, the last one, the living one, and have this irresistible urge to stop as soon as possible at some liquor store. Just maybe they left the bar, and they might be surprised at how urgent this feeling is, okay? And that is sometimes indications that you have what's called nesting or piggyback, which basically that host has an attachment that had an attachment, okay? And usually when you work with somebody along these lines, when you start questioning and asking them a series of questions that you do as part of the technique, and then they start telling you things like, I don't care, or they appear unemotional. This is by the time that they're communicating with that entity that's attached to your client. There's a good chance that it had its own hitchhiker. Okay, that's like one of the things that that gives you an indication what you might be dealing with. Now, this is the degrees of closeness, or how you're affected by a discarnate. Now, remember what I told you. Discarnates are around us all the time, okay? People that sometimes are not aware they're dead, don't understand they're dead, or they're just maybe afraid to go on into the light because they fear they're going to be judged. If at sometimes they had religious teachings that said you're going to burn in hell, they're like, I don't like this, but I'd rather have this than go into the light and then go down there. So these are the degrees of closeness as far as how they affect you. Now, the first one is temptation. Okay, temptation, it's not really a compulsion. but you get this idea, you start thinking, or you see something that's really not your basic personality. Okay, like that you even recognize, like, why did I say that? Why did I do that? It's not really a compulsion, but that temptation to do or say something that even while you might even be doing it or thinking it, you recognize it's not your own. But a lot of people don't. They just brush it off. Then the second degree of closeness is what's called influencing or shadowing. Okay, now the effects of that closeness from a discarnate entity is mood swings, um, fear, depression, and moments when you just become very irrational. Sometimes behavior that before you didn't have. Okay. Now, the third one is called oppression or harassing. Okay. Now, this is when that entity is affecting your personal feelings and your habits. Okay. And sometimes, if you have a sensitive, a clairvoyant, they might be able to see that entity either attached to your aura, like remember your aura is around your body, or within it. Okay. At that point, sometimes that you do get a clairvoyant who can see that. Now, the fourth degree is called obsession. Okay. Now, this is when that entity has invaded your, not only your psyche, but your actual physical body. Okay. And it's kind of melded its personality traits and the bodily feelings with those of the person. In other words, um, let's say if this invading entity used to have a bad hip, for example, sometimes you will get the living person all of a sudden develop this hip problems or these hip pains or certain things that they're like, I've never had this injury. This has never happened to me. That might happen. Like I said, new personality traits, attitudes, and believe it or not, even talents. Okay, this is where, which by the way, no talent is worth the problems that this type of interaction has. All right, and then the last one is possession. Okay, this is the complete takeover of the host. Okay, this is rare. Okay, now sometimes berserk behavior can be attributed to possession, and a person can alternate from obsession to possession. In other words, at some points just have a level of closeness, which is obsession, okay, and then jump or leapfrog into a possession. And like I said, though, possession is very rare. Okay, it's not that easy. Um, Now, for example, a lot of people, by the way, again, this could be human entities or any of the non-human entities that I described earlier. Okay, and like I said, what they call dark energy forces or DFCs. That they're the best way to look at it, because I really don't like to use the words demons because that has all this dramatic connotation to it. So I refer to them as non-human entities. Okay, and what that means is they have never been alive in their own physical bodies, and they are usually on a mission to destroy. Now, we're not really sure where they come from. Okay, some things, some thoughts are that that negative thought forms give dark forces like Satan or Lucifer or any type of negative uh, belief system, or at this point, because every culture, religion, uh, civilization sometimes has different names for something that's evil. Okay, uh, now that basically they're created to assist these evil beings or whatever you want to call them, that again what they want is to destroy. Okay, um, now another theory is that they might be fallen angels. um, Now there's sometimes, and by the way, there is such a thing as curses, psychic attacks, negative forms. These are negative energies generated by living people, and I do want to differentiate with that, because one thing is negative influences from discarnates versus something else is being generated by a living person, which can be done. It's not that easy, But yes, it can be done. Now, one of the questions I get is, how do they get in? Okay. Okay. Now, in order for an entity to attach to a human, that person has got to be vulnerable in some way. Um, this earthbound entity can attach while that person's unconscious, like for any reason, such as trauma, emotional or physical, anesthesia and surgery, blow to the head, extreme drunkenness, blackouts. Uh, Also, any type of drug that you take that causes the same effect. Severe stress, exhaustion, grief, extreme anger, fear, guilt. It can open you up for attachment. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just makes you more vulnerable. Okay. Now, without proper protection, okay, again, let me stress this, without proper protection, that doesn't mean it's a guarantee, because things such as channeling, mediumship, automatic writings, or open invitations for possession, okay, as is being present at a seance or using a Ouija board. Now, before everybody, the usual suspects, without proper protection, okay, then let me clarify this. Protection can mean, of course, prayers, okay, uh, to the divine, to your guardian, whoever you think that you want to ask for protection, okay. If you have a problem already with drugs, with alcohol, you should not be engaging in any of this, because I guarantee you your aura is very weak. Okay. If you've ever been a person who's had their boundaries broken, either as a child or in life, okay, somebody violated your boundaries and you never made peace with it. And by this, I don't mean like, oh, I accept it. In other words, your boundaries are back out to where they should be. Like, what boundaries, like when somebody stands too close to you and you're like, why were you so close to me? Okay, we do have these boundaries. If you've never done the work to put those boundaries back to where they should be, you, how can I put this? You are putting out like a little signal. I am a victim. I am a victim. I am a victim. And believe me, putting yourself in any scenario like this, you could really get a nasty attachment, especially if you're saying, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. Guess what? You're going to get an entity that's a victimizer. And that's why certain people need to be really honest with themselves before they engage in either doing paranormal investigations, channeling, mediumship, writings, you name it, seances, Ouija boards. That doesn't mean if you had these experiences, you can never do that. But there's a certain amount of work that you do emotionally and inwards, okay, where your boundaries go back out, not too far out, not there or broken, okay, not where you're trying to repeat what occurred to you at some point earlier in life. Okay, now another thing that can open you up for possible attachment is childhood abuse, rape, incest can allow entities to attach at that age. Okay. Now, sometimes after the death of a loved one, a person can unknowingly invite attachment of that loved one with such thoughts as, don't leave me, I don't want to let you go. And once an entity gains entry through a hole in your aura, okay, it also allows for more attachments, okay, because unfortunately, some of the behavior that it brings about weakens you even further. Now, this is really important because, like I said, there's certain activities like the Ouija board and going to haunted houses that everything's okay. These are like no-nos. There's certain places which are jam-packed with discarnate entities who are looking for a nice person like yourself to attach to, or at least follow you home. These are hospitals. Let me explain about hospitals. Hospitals, you have people that have passed away who are unaware of it. They either died suddenly, violently, maybe they were in an accident, they were being heavily sedated because of an illness, and they just missed it when they passed away. or they were under anesthesia and they died on the operating table. And then there's some that they just slip away and they just don't realize they're dead. So they see themselves in their body. Nobody sees them, nobody hears them, and they're walking around. And then they see you, and you have this nice light, or you seem like a nice person, or you remind them of their sister, or whatever. Next thing you know, after a while that they've been walking around, nobody pays attention to them. They might decide to follow you home. And I'm going to give you later on what you can do to, to deal with that. It's not a big deal, but now, another one, the obvious one, cemeteries and funeral homes are common places to pick up entities. Why? Because a lot of these entities, right after death, especially if they're not clear about where they go, they kind of follow their body around like, I can't get in it, but I don't want to let it out of my sight because I just don't know what else to do. Okay? Funeral homes, obviously, because that's that time right after the death where the person or the personality is still trying to figure it out. All right. Now, there's also a theory of like attracts like, and this also applies, such as negative energy, such as psychic attacks and curses generated by other living people. Okay. And this also works as in our own negative thought forms that we generate for ourselves, such as fear, anger, jealousy, can invite and feed in psychic attacks and curses. In other words, whether it's an attachment from a dead person or an attack from a living, it's like attract like. If you're a negative person or you're filled with hatred or fear or any of these things, chances are that this is what's going to come and be attracted to you. Okay. And that's why you have to sometimes really, nobody's going to, everybody, it's a human condition. You are going to feel anger and sadness. These are all things that every human being feels. It's when people obsess and they spend all their time thinking and feeling this way. That's when you start running into problems. Now, one of the questions I get is, what are the signs of an attachment? Okay. Like I said, sometimes I've had clients who will say, they've gone to the doctor and they say, all my tests came back okay, but I know something's wrong. So, for example, they can have varying degrees of influence over the host. It could go from a mild energy drain to almost total possession, which I described as rare. Now, some telltale signs could be hearing voices, sudden cravings for alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, etc., especially after a surgery or some type of traumatic event. Sudden weight gain. Now, by the way, when I say sudden weight gain, when it's unexplained, okay, and we all know our bodies and our behavior and what we do or don't do. Again, after a surgery or traumatic event, fears and phobias you didn't used to have before, sudden changes in behavior, such as increased anger, depression, thoughts of suicide, serious illness of unknown causes or origins. Again, maybe your doctors somehow can't pinpoint what it actually is. Loss of energy, memory and concentration problems, unexplained physical problems, like that you get a pain from like an undetermined cause. Migraine headaches, night terrors, nightmares, panic, or anxiety attacks, and of course the extreme multiple personalities. Now again, I want to really clarify this. You could be a person, or there are people that have mental illnesses, okay, which have nothing whatsoever to do with spiritual attachment. It's an organic component. It's a disease of the brain or an imbalance in the chemicals of the brain. The problem comes in is that sometimes if a person has a mental illness and they do have some type of spiritual influence or discarnate attachments, it makes the symptoms more severe. It also makes the person not, let's say, stay for treatment, work with the medications that they're being prescribed. They just become so much more difficult. It's like a telescoping, a magnification of all their symptoms or to take the actions that they would need to lead a relatively normal life within what, that they've been diagnosed with. So again, it's in my experience and in my belief, it's not an either or. Sometimes it's a component of both. And again, I want to clarify this because some people think, well, mental illness, if I get an exorcism or something like this, that's it, I'm going to get cured. No, that's what I'm saying. This is not a magic pill. That sometimes you do have some type of illness, whether it's mental or physical, and it's still there, but you're not going to have that overreaching influence where you don't take care of yourself. You have these, you sometimes you even alienate those around you. And one of the things that I see a lot of is this behavior and what happens to those around you. It causes this feeling of hopelessness. Like, this is not going to have a solution. I'm not going to have a resolution to this. That to me is one of the clear indicators that you might have some type of spiritual influence or interference outside of just things that happen, the human condition. Nobody leads a perfect life. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, how does this compare with exorcism? Okay. Now, this is different from exorcism, all right? Usually, exorcism is performed by either a minister or a member of the clergy. And like I said before, the procedure is to cast out the demons, okay? Now, in releasement, okay, in that process, what we do is we talk to these demons and turn their darkness into light and release them to go to their proper place in the light, okay? Only after they have agreed to go. Now, this prevents the dark ones from returning to the host or to anyone else, because think, you expel a demon to go where? Back to hell or where? And in cases of an earthbound spirit, okay, which by the way, let me clarify, when you can't, they have to agree to go. However, you can have them taken to a place where they can think about it. You can tell them basically you got to leave and they got to go. You don't want to go into the light? Okay, don't go into the light. Well, I'm going to have angels or light workers or beings of light, whoever it is that's around you assisting you. Well, I'm going to take you to a room where you can think about this. But yes, you can do that. They just, because of course they're going to be resistant. They're not going to want to leave. Now, in cases of an earthbound spirit, okay, basically you're letting this entity know, you're making it aware of a situation, and you lovingly guide this soul into the light, okay, usually in the care of a loved one, all right, who comes to help in this transition process. When it's something like a curse or negative energy, basically you do it by severing the connection and transforming the energy from negative to positive, because again, we're not talking a human entity or anything like this. So, this is, and of course, this is a very condensed explanation for what really takes place. Now, does this really help people? Yes. And I got this question, especially at the beginning when I hadn't done it that much. And by the way, most of the authors of those books stumbled on this process strictly by accident. Okay, they were hypnotizing clients, and these clients were describing these things, and they thought this is all in this person's mind, like whatever. And they just went with the flow. They just whoa. But what happened was that when they went through the process and they pretended along with the client and addressed what was coming up, this person got better. So as far as they were concerned initially, they were like, okay, I'm getting the results. It's real or not real, it's benefiting this person. Later on, as they treated more and more people, they realized, okay, how can all these different people have these same experiences? And they started realizing that it wasn't a component or just a made up thing in their mind. And again, I'm going to, in answer to that question, does this really help people? To some people, whether it's real or not real, okay, if it helps somebody, it is real. By the way, I'm not saying that I don't think it's real. I do think it's real. Okay. Again, but it's not a cure-all. Okay. Now, what happens is once that entity is released, a lot of the problems that that person's had tend to clear up quickly. Now, it also depends the degree of influence that this entity had. And I do want to clarify, because sometimes, and I explain this to my clients, you know, we're going to do this, and it's not going to be like a clap of thunder and whoop, it's gone. I said, by the way, this is going to be a process, and I've had them. They'll call me 1, 2, 3 weeks later, and they'll say, hey, you know what? I've noticed I don't like this. I'm starting to like that again. Or that pain I had, it's gone. And, you know, all these things is very subtle. It starts to, it's like a shift, like when you're trying to get critical mass to move something really heavy, that at the beginning you don't think it's moving or you're not making any headway, and all of a sudden you get that shift. And this is exactly how this works. Okay, this is exactly how it works, where all of a sudden, a person that was very hopeless and despondent sometimes, all of a sudden they start seeing possibilities. They start seeing things differently. The things that before didn't were making them happy and they had lost that, they starts coming back. They start liking food they didn't like, or vice versa, or they start eating the foods that before they were eating, which of course was due to the influence of that entity. Now, like I said, these changes are very subtle, and at the beginning, the person might not even notice them at all. All right, and this is just simply because of the nature of the attachment. And what happens is, a lot of times people try to do some type of spirit releasement as the last resort. Okay, and you know, I agree that people should always absolutely, you know, go to see their doctors when they do have anything like that, because like I said, this is not usually, sometimes this is not the answer. Sometimes there's something really wrong with you organically in your body that needs to be addressed by a medical doctor. Now, it's one of the things that I tell them, sometimes after you go through a spirit releasement session, you know, you kind of feel tired. Okay, and this is, you have to understand that sometimes this entity has been with a person sometimes for many years, and there's almost a sense of familiarity, even though the client might recognize at some point that this is not really them, but it's only under hypnosis, because usually we're too busy in the real world to actually address these things. Another sign sometimes that you might have an attachment, especially a nasty one, is when people engage and they have that nasty inner chatter, where that inner voice that we all have, by the way, is always nasty. It says bad things to you, makes you feel bad, critical. If this person is happy, you know, in other words, always the put down. This right there is a good sign that you do have an attachment, and a bad one too, in the sense of maybe this was a really rotten person when they were alive. And guess what? They're really rotten now. And they're not happy because they're stuck. And by the way, this is the thing. Once you have a discarnate who is in your aura, they're stuck. They can't get out. And this is very important, because even when you have attachments from people that loved you, let's say, like we said, somebody says, please don't leave me, and they stay around and they're worried, and then they're stuck. And sometimes they're very eager to leave, but they can't. Okay, so there's a lot of different scenarios that can play out with this. Okay. According, and I'm going to use Dr. Bill Baldwin interpretation. Okay, this is really important to explain how a human soul or spirit, how they arrive to be in that situation where they don't have a body, a human body, which is what you need to exist in this plane, and they haven't gone into the light. So they're in a very undesirable and very frustrating place. Okay. Now, usually he described it as that this person, let's say after they die, they feel very shocked, especially if they had a traumatic. Also, if, like I said before, they had a lot of false religious beliefs, okay, about the afterlife. Either they didn't have any, nobody explained it to them, or again, they thought that they were going to burn. Also, if that person dies with intense emotions of anger, fear, love, resentment, jealousy, guilt, remorse, all the big ones, um, this all tends to fixate a person after their death. So to a great extent, this entity now dwells in a place where time doesn't really exist and doesn't really pass. Okay, it's like almost like a freeze frame. Now, can you imagine having your human consciousness where you know everything for you is measured by time, and now all of a sudden you're in a place and an existence where there is no passage of time? Um, for example, if a person dies in the heat of hatred, then that state is going to continue after they die. All right, essentially unrelieved, unresolved, and it acts like a ball and chain to keep that spirit earthbound. Now, once an earthbound entity can't make that transition into the light, that's when they start looking for someone to attach to for whatever reason, like I described before. Um, Now, for example, especially spirits that have just passed away, again, remember, they don't have the human body, but their desires are still there. Okay, it's part of it consciously. So, newly deceased spirits usually retain their appetites for certain drugs, try to satisfy their addictions by attaching themselves to users. Okay, and if I have time, I'm going to read a small passage from one of the books that when I read, I was like, what? And by the way, I want to state that when I read all these books, it took me literally 2 years to wrap my head around the concept that there's so many discarnate entities around us. I was always the believer that most people believe, you get ghosts at certain places, the cemetery, of course. But when I started reading this material, another good book, even though it was written many years ago, is 30 Years Among the Dead by Dr. Wicklund. I had a hard time with this. It was like, what? I remember putting the book down. It was like, no. And it literally took me 2 years to really come to grips with the concept, especially if once you read more about it. Okay, now entities can become attached to due to the influence of previously attached entities, and I described that earlier, such as nesting, okay, or that piggyback, okay. So that's like basically an entity within an entity. Uh, Now, what happens is when that person dies, the first attached entity remains within that one, and then when that second one attaches, then basically you've got that happening. You've got two for the price of one or more. And sometimes, again, a lot of people think of the attachment as being something negative or malevolent. You do have entities that attach due to their own motivations, and a lot of times it turns out for benevolent. What they initially do is for benevolent reasons, even though there's always some type of self-serving in it. But they're, like I said, sometimes they do it out of worry for the person that's left behind, or that person um, is asking them to stay, things of this nature. Now, an entity attaches also because it has unfinished business with the person they're attaching to, or someone close to them. Okay, what does that tell you? In other words, if I can't get to the person I want, I'll go to the person nearest if they can. Again, the attachment, it doesn't just happen because that entity wants to attach to you. But if you have a very weak or thinned out aura, if you've experienced all these things, and by the way, how do you keep your aura intact? Prayer, good nutrition, just a normal lifestyle where you take care of yourself. Okay, yeah, what you think, that you're happy, or you try to be happy and have a positive outlook. And the human conditions, we all go like this, up and down, good days, bad days, but no extremes. Okay, usually if you do that, your aura is going to be intact. So even if you have an entity that for whatever reason, even if you're, especially because you're a nice person or whatever, they try to attach to you, they can kind of like come around you, and you might have to spend a couple of days where you're like, where's these? But they kind of go away because they just can't get to you or into you. All right. Now, an entity attaches because they are magnetically drawn to the host's strong emotions. For example, anger, grief, or repressed negativity. Okay, that pairs itself with what they were feeling when they were alive. Okay, again, as human beings, we all experience emotions, extreme emotions, sometimes very negative ones. It's just as important not to repress them. The problem comes in when people fixate and they continuously feel this way and they indulge themselves in feeling this way. Okay, they don't try to dig themselves out of it. Before you know it, they're like a magnet for these type of attachments of like is attracts like. Sometimes entities attach because the opportunity presents itself. Uh, the host could be susceptible because they have high levels of stress. Let me stress, high levels of stress. Normal everyday stressors that everybody has, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about high levels of stress, alcohol and drug abuse. Um, the host also may be vulnerable to through surgery, emotional and physical trauma, organ transplant, blood transfusions, etc. Okay. And here's one that most people are going to go, oh my God, but yes, entities may attach during sexual intercourse, especially to the trauma of sexual abuse or rape, incest, etc. Yes, that does open up that. And this is all on the metaphysical plane. Okay, it doesn't say absolutely it's going to happen. It's just saying it's going to make you more vulnerable at host. Now, and I'm going to go, this is a very condensed version of different scenarios. An entity of a terminated pregnancy can attach to a newborn baby who would otherwise have been their brother or sister, okay, if they would have been born. Okay, this does happen. Okay, even in other words, what I'm describing is that you can get an attachment within the womb, or in utero, and sometimes, uh, that's a whole different discussion of what can be done when there's either a terminated pregnancy or miscarriages or things of this nature. What would be the best course of action for the mother, the parents, but especially the mother, to address, what happened and to prevent this. Okay, now, entities can attach during funerals if they're welcomed by the grieving person. By the way, it's very normal when a person's grieving not to want to lose that person. Okay. But when that living person basically is saying they're kind of like talking to that deceased person, like if they were alive, almost like if they know that they can be heard, don't leave, stay with me. It becomes a very bad thing for that living host and for that deceased soul later on, because basically you might have a soul who doesn't go into the light because they want to stay behind and address your need or console you. And then later on, when they're ready to leave, they cannot leave. You're basically tying them to this earth plane. And I'm sure that if you love someone, you would never want to do that to them. Okay. Entities can often attach to sympathetic people in hospitals or nursing homes. Okay. All these nice people that as a matter of fact, nurses, doctors and everything, even though it makes them more vulnerable, because when you have an entity that sometimes is even looking for somebody to take care of them because they're kind of lost, guess what? They see this person walking around that's very nice, very caring, and it's almost like an invitation, like, wow, I'm going to go with this person because, they seem pretty nice and, they're sympathetic. All right. Now, and this is very briefly, there's different methods. You're going to have some hypnotherapists that work with a medium and the client. Okay. And basically the medium is able to see on a clairvoyant level what's going on with the client. In some cases, they act as a medium. In other words, that spirit goes into them. I don't use that method. I used it once, as a clairvoyant, and it was okay, but I found that I had other where I basically converse with that spirit, and a lot of the times, usually what I use is what's called idiomotor response, which is where I get, it's kind of a little bit lengthy, but basically I'm asking questions, yes or no, and you'd be surprised what your subconscious and an idiomotor response through your finger will disclose. And you can use that very, very effectively to find out if there is an entity, okay? And also the way they respond gives you an idea if this entity is ready to go or is going to resist, okay? Now, um, going back to the original theme of when spirits haunt a particular place, okay, usually they have a reason for that specific place. Again, sudden death, violent, unexpected, traumatic death, there's those circumstances. And of course, the one everybody knows about, unfinished business, or they have a score to settle. Um, Also, they are unable to give up their physical possessions. Now, I think this is really important because um, a lot of times, okay, you will get a, and I see in all these shows where they basically advise people that have ghosts or, uh, let's say it's the old owner of the house and they're being told, no, you coexist. No, human beings on this plane are never meant to coexist with spirits. When you die, you progress, and yes, let's say for example, a family member, they're going to come back and they're going to check on you and they're going to say, hey, good, doing good. And they're going to be back on their way because you know what? They already have attained an enlightenment that assures them you're going to work it out. Okay, when you have a family member or a person that's there that wants to possess that house, wants to possess that person, wants to possess whatever, run the show, you're talking about a human being that's still got their ego attached. Okay, because the only times you need house, clothing, people, whatever, possessions is when you're alive. Okay, so I personally disagree when people are given the advice to coexist with earthbound spirits. That's not good for the living, and that's definitely not good for the dead. Okay, especially when they're trapped, you know. Um, and I've heard of these experiences a lot where at the beginning, if somebody realizes, well, they've got some type of ghost or spirit or something going on in their house. And at the beginning, it was kind of mild and they kind of let it go. Sometimes even years go by and then things start to ramp up. And then when they look back at it, they saw where all of these, what used to be a knock or something really like, it starts ramping up. Things start becoming more sinister, more malevolent, more this, more that. You know why? Because you have, let's just, a human soul that's trapped in a state of existence, wanting to have a human body and not being able to have it. And they're seeing human beings doing their lives for better or for worse with the benefit of a human body. Do you think that that spirit is going to be frustrated? Yes. And if that person in life was not such a nice person, then you can put that nastiness like 10 degrees when, yeah, they might say, this is my house, this is my thing, whatever, or I'm going to kick you out because I'm just, on top of that, I was a nasty person. Now I'm super frustrated because guess what? You've got what I don't have. You've got a body. You've got a body to either hammer, nail in the wall, take a drink, do whatever it is. So no, you never want to do that. You need to cross these spirits over into the light, someplace where they can, like, it's going to be okay. This is not the place for them. Us, with human bodies, incarnated beings, this is the place for us. We get all the good, we get all the bad. We get the pains, we get the colds, we get the diseases, we get the good stuff. We can have a drink, we can taste happiness. This is what comes with being on this plane of existence. Once you don't have this body, this is not the plane for you. Okay? And when people suggest that you would want to keep a human spirit tied to this level, I don't think they really understand what that is. Like I said, your loved ones or other spirits that go on in light, they can come back, but they have no attractions to hang out here, really. They'll come back and check on you, and sometimes they do, like, like some people say, well, I smelled a certain scent or on a certain anniversary, and they kind of like want to let you know, I'm aware of you, but they don't stay here. They're not tied here. And they do understand you are going to work it out. This is your moment, your time to do your thing. So they're not going to stick around and haunt you, for lack of a better word. Okay. Okay. Let me get off my soapbox. Okay. Again, you get the entity. He's not confused. They don't realize that they're really physically dead. Now, negative energies also can inhabit a place for different reasons. If you have a location, so there's been violence, traumatic deaths have occurred, they basically retain the energy of those happenings, which is a lot of times what's considered residual hauntings. There's no intelligence behind it. It's just feelings or noises, sometimes actual reenactments, battlefields. You even have homes where people were constantly fighting or arguing. They retain the emotions, the actions. Which, by the way, I do it personally, and I tell my clients and even my families, if you're ever going to move to a new location, I would, besides, what people usually do, which is they clean up the place or repaint it, I cleanse it, I salt it, and I sage it, and I basically ask any negative energy they got to go. And when I ask the angels, whoever you consider a guardian, to come and guard the entrance to your home and your location. But I would never ever move into a place without doing that, because even if you don't have any actual intelligent hauntings, sometimes you have no idea what went on behind those walls. When somebody was there, that doesn't mean anybody got killed. But if you had a lot of arguments, if you had a very dysfunctional type of lifestyle going on in those walls, believe it or not, they can affect you and your family down the line. Now, something I did want to mention is something called clearings. Okay. Now, this is not an actual entity. These are things that happen due to our connection to living human beings. Okay. Now, for example, one of the things is cutting cords to divorced spouses. Many times I would have clients come to me and they would say, you know what, whether it was a divorce or the end of a relationship, I didn't want to be with this person anymore and I broke up, but now I can't stop thinking about them. And you know what? And I can't seem to get on with my life, especially with my romantic life. I didn't want to be with him, but now it's just like I'm stuck. I guarantee you that there's some type of cord to this person, okay? Including cord sometimes to casual sex partners, okay? And there's a method to this, very easy, that you do in order to cut those cords on a metaphysical plane between you and that person. And by the way, sometimes, especially if you end a relationship like where you wanted to and the other person did, where they will attach to you. And a lot of times that attachment will come out from behind your shoulder blades, like almost like if somebody is attached to you through your back, like so that you're not aware of it. And that's when you find yourself thinking about this person, like, why am I thinking about this person so much? Or caring, or like you just can't physically, you're not together, but you're not apart either. And I've had people come to me and say, well, I try to get on with my life and I can't seem to attract anybody. And I'll say, and usually I ask them, well, what was happening with the last relationship? And they'll explain. And I said, do you know that you might physically, if anybody looks at you, you're like, I'm not with anybody. But if you've got an attachment or a cord between you and that person, any other potential person that might be wanting to come up to you senses that there is an emotional attachment, that you're not free. They might think that you're committed and you're just out there. And a lot of times after this cord cutting, which is very easy to do, of a sudden they start meeting people. They start, everything shifts, and it's as easy as that. Sometimes also cutting the connections with people who give you harmful thoughts. Again, by this is somebody that obsesses bad things about you, thinking bad things about you. Also clearing ancestral lines of patterns that have influenced your family for generations. This is really important. Maybe I'll have another show on it. These could be vows of poverty that people take, generational curses, a lot of stuff that sometimes when you look at the family, you're like, what's going on here? And sometimes this is clearing, you need to clear that ancestral line or break vows that were made by one of your ancestors. I mean, there's a lot of clearings that we can do. Let's see. And there's even trauma. Sometimes if you experience trauma for any reason, whether it's childbirth or you had an accident, believe it or not, you get like a cord, like something that affects you. And you have to clear it, like let it go. Even though logically you're saying, okay, that moment came and went and I don't physically feel the pain, there's still that trauma affects you and you need to cut the cord with it. So that's something also to consider. Now, like I said, this is a very, oh, and another thing, one other thing that's really important with the clearing is what's called childhood programming by an authority figure. Okay, unfortunately, like parents, teachers, when you're being told you're stupid, you'll never learn anything, you're just a wild animal, you're an absolute klutz, can't you do anything right? Sometimes you have to do clearings to cut that away, because if not, you still get that influence, either your own inner talk to yourself, you're kind of repeating that, and you need to cut it. Like, you know, sometimes people talk to themselves worse than they would to any stranger on the street. So that's also another reason why you can do cord cutting. Psychic attacks by another person, and you might not even be aware of this, by the way. You know, sometimes people are aware of who their enemies are. Sometimes you're not. This could be another person's anger, jealousy, just envy, for whatever reason, that it's going to be strong enough to constitute a psychic attack on you. Now, the other way is that your negativity towards others, where you're attacking them and without your conscious intent to attack them. So you've got to look also, like when you're caught up, when you're obsessing about, you know, negativity towards a person. By the way, curses, because people ask me that. This is an extreme form of psychic attack. Okay. And there's people that are into certain black arts that they kind of know how to do this. Okay, this is not something normally. That's why you will have people who go to magical practitioners, the dark, you know, that work with the dark side, to do these curses for them. It's not that easy just for somebody to do it on their own. But again, it's not that common. Like I said, one of the most important, I run this across. There's just the relationships that have ended badly and unpleasantly, and they have all these strings, negative strings attached. And, you know, these negative bonds are really, really powerful, and they can just get in your way. And sometimes people just don't understand why things have gotten to the point that they have. So at this time, I wanted to go ahead and end the discussion. I tried briefly to go over what I know in my experience and what I've read from all these authors as to what spirit attachment is, without the drama of exorcisms. And by the way, I'm not saying that exorcism doesn't work, but I know there's a lot of people out there that are saying, is the religious approach the only way to handle this? And it isn't. By the way, I'm not saying that there is no use for religion. On the contrary, I believe that strong belief in the divine, in good things, in protection, these are all essential to keeping you safe. But there's other ways of handling this, especially if the attachment is another human soul. And well, anyway, uh, based on the feedback I get, I will decide if, I'm going to do another show on this, maybe going more in depth into certain areas, because there's a lot of it. This is, like I said, a very condensed version of what this topic is about. And I'm hoping that you really like it. And again, I'm hoping that you're going to stop by every Friday and see my shows. This weekend, as a matter of fact, I might be going out to do some field work, some live investigations in this area. And I will be looking forward to getting feedback. And please, I want you to subscribe to my channel and like this video. And again, make suggestions for other topics that you would like me to talk about. Also, if you have certain guests or certain authors, experts, anything, please let me know, and I will make all efforts to bring them on. And I'll be seeing you. And I have really, really, truly enjoyed spending this time with you. Take care.